Hello everyone and welcome to you all for this, the biggest ever conversation on the Isle of Man's green opportunities and challenges. This is the inaugural Green Talks Live Isle of Man Sustainability Debate. And we want all of you to be involved in the debate as well. So we're hoping that you will have questions for our panelists, our eminent panel, throughout the evening. But we're actually going to begin a little further afield. We're going to start with a chat with a world-renowned conservationist who's played a leading role in developing UNESCO's Biosphere Reserves program. Now, if you don't know what a biosphere is, you will soon find out. There are now well over 700 of them around the world in over 130 countries, and it's this professor's work that helped the Isle of Man to become the only entire nation to achieve biosphere status. Please welcome, via live link from Australia, Professor Peter Bridgewater. Hello to you, Peter. Great to see you. First of all, for those who don't know, what is a biosphere?
Well, that's an interesting question. What a biosphere is the living envelope around the planet. What a biosphere reserve is a special place for people and nature on the planet. And that's what the Isle of Man's biosphere reserve status actually is.
So what does the Isle of Man have to do to maintain that status? Because it is renewed over a period of years, isn't it?
It is. Every 10 years, there is a so-called periodic review. Essentially that looks at what the performance of the jurisdiction that manages the biosphere reserve does and what will happen into the future. So for the Isle of Man, it needs to demonstrate that it is fulfilling all its original promises, as it were, when the nomination went in. Broadly speaking, I would expect that it would get renewed. However, I do have some reservations that it is not sitting in the right place in the government structure in the Isle of Man, not in the right place that was originally thought.
We'll get on to why you think that's the case, but just explain exactly how a biosphere exists. What's within a biosphere?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are actually three zones within a biosphere. The first is the core area, which is legally protected, and there may be more than one. But however many there are, they are surrounded by buffer zones, and the whole is wrapped, if you like, in what's called the transition area. So it's got three zones, but it's also got three objectives, and the objectives are broadly speaking, sustainability through conservation as the core, as it were. So it's about sustainability. And one of the problems with biosphere reserves sometimes is that they get seen only as areas for biodiversity protection rather than sustainability overall.
So sustainability is really important, and you have reservations that this island is going to be able to meet the criteria potentially when renewal comes up.
My reservations are about how it's managed in the island structure. And when it was originally proposed through very sterling work of two ministers at the time, one in economic development and one in the environment area, together with agriculture and fishing, that original idea was that it would be under the so-called cabinet office or the central structure in the island, because it is about everything on the island. And it's important to see that it is not just about the core areas, it's about the whole island and how the core drives the sustainability issue, if you like. If we don't have good cores and we don't have good areas of buffer, then sustainability in the long term cannot be fulfilled.
How much of a blow would it be for the Isle of Man to lose biosphere status?
Well, of course, it would be very embarrassing. But as I said, I'm not convinced that it will be necessarily lost, but I think there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done to demonstrate that it is fulfilling its original objectives. And if it's not situated centrally in government, then it needs to have a good case as to how it's being managed, not simply for, as it were, nature conservation, but for the broader issue of sustainability.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Professor Bridgewater, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Back to bed.
I want to pick up on that final point there, Ralph, Peake. The suggestion is that maintaining sustainability, in order to maintain the biosphere label, as it were, for the island, it's not part of central government thinking.
Yeah, I think it was probably seen by the public and a lot of people just to be a biodiversity issue or a nature issue, but really it's about how we actually live with renewable energy. That is a key part of it. It's moving away from fossil fuels and actually having that renewable energy here on the Isle of Man. That's what the key thing should be. It's doable nowadays. We just need that will and that want to do it, and that's what we'd like to see.
So it's all about will. I mean, let's step back a little bit, Adrian, because people can see the effects of climate change every day. And I just want you, as a meteorologist, a well-respected figure, to paint a picture of how climate change is affecting the Isle of Man and affecting people every day.
Well, indeed, Clive, the climate change is happening globally, nationally, locally. No denying that. All our measurements confirm that and are consistent with the IPCC reports ahead of COP28. We can see all that, and most of us can picture that. But visualising that for the Isle of Man is a thing that is an education piece, because we need to emphasise that sustainability is needed as we go through a transition of period into climate change, because our ecosystem, our biodiversity, our resilience, our network, our infrastructure, they're all coming under stress. And that stress has started, and that stress is knocking on our door with every increment of warming globally on the planet. The impacts on the weather systems, on people, the populations, and farming, the oceans, will increase. So the clock is ticking, and we need to watch out for those stresses that are coming because of climate change.
Professor Curran, I mean, it's clear that something has to be done. You were instrumental in helping to formulate the island's Net Zero 2050 strategy. Just explain that in a little bit more detail.
Right, yeah. Something certainly has to be done, and it needs to be done very urgently. And I think that sense of urgency is beginning to become more widespread, and people are beginning to understand that. And the whole point is we have to drive down greenhouse gas emissions, or quite often we just talk about carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide that is man-made and released into the atmosphere, 1/3 of it roughly is sucked up by the biosphere, by plants, trees. These are all good things. 1/3 goes into the oceans and it gets sucked up there. 1/3 stays in the atmosphere and is doing incredible damage there, driving climate change. I mean, the science is well established, and has been for over 100 years, and I don't think anybody really seriously argues against that anymore. But the difficulty comes in how do we drive down those man-made emissions. We know how to do it, we've got to have the will to do it, and to do it urgently and rapidly.
Sure. I mean, Graham, Makepeace-Warne, we heard Professor Bridgewater talking about the biosphere. I mean, how is climate change affecting the island's wildlife and natural habitats?
If you can't say that climate change is the biggest threat to wildlife now, it certainly will be in the future. We're already seeing things. Just last week we had our first Chetty's warbler on the island. That's clearly moving north with the warming temperatures. Butterflies are moving north, they're getting bigger. So we do stand to gain wildlife, but we do stand to lose a lot as well. Adrian was talking earlier about the currents in our oceans that are being affected by climate change. They bring in the plankton that things like basking sharks feed on, so they will move, they will may not be able to find the food when they need it to reproduce. And that you might think that's a minor problem, but when you think that basking sharks live for at least 50 years, the females aren't sexually mature until they're 20, just 1 year of missing that can have a huge knock-on effect for that species. And that plankton also feeds the sand eels, which then feed our puffins and our Manx shearwater, the only animal that we have that's named after the Isle of Man. So, these are all, one thing that I can pick out, but that will be painting a picture of all our biodiversity, all of our wildlife.
Clara, I mean, people listening to this might be thinking, this problem's too big, it's too scary. I mean, I don't know, how am I going to deal with, the polar ice caps melting and so on and so forth, or coastal erosion here in the Isle of Man? It's just too big to get your head around. And I just want to get on to what you're trying to do, because what you seem to be suggesting is that actually, as individuals, we can all play a part. And just explain that in the context of the company that you run.
Yeah, I think, we hear it a lot. People say, oh, we're only 80,000 people, what's my impact going to be? And actually, it's quite big. You're 80,000 people collectively, and every little bit does help. And, I think it's hard for people to get their head around, what is it, can I just do even something little? And for me, it was a bit of a big step was, well, actually, I want to give everything. I love living here on the Isle of Man, and, I have seriously considered how the future looks if we don't kind of take drastic action, and I wanted to take my first step to making, a big change. And yeah, it's scary, but I think we've got to change our mindset. Well, we got here in the first place with slow adjustments. Let's do it. What have we got to lose? And we really do have our future generations to think about. And collectively, the mindset of, we're too small, it's just so wrong, because we're actually, when you look at it, we are making a huge difference. And, you don't want to be the only place to not be doing anything about it. I certainly don't want to live somewhere that's not trying to make progressive change towards a sustainable place of living. And I don't think there's anyone really I was saying my circle or people that I come into contact with who feel the same. Why would you want to live somewhere that's not striving to make change?
But your particular business allows individuals to get involved because they're recycling.
Yeah, and we see so many people as well. People are so keen. There is no debate for them. They want to do their bit. And we have people saying, oh, my grandson came home from school and he said, I have to sign up because it's me playing my part. And I think that's what's so important, having accessible kind of ways to make change in your household. Makes you not only feel good, but makes you more willing to do it, ingrains it in your everyday life, live in a more sustainable way. And I know waste isn't exactly glamorous, but, it's an easy and, I hate to say enjoyable, but it's an enjoyable way to make a difference and start really getting on board with it.
Professor?
Yeah, we do often hear this story, myth, I would call it, that, it's too difficult. And I always respond by remembering it's 25 years ago now, a small family-owned business rang me up. They were a nursery for orchard trees, and their lease on a farm in Ayrshire was coming to the end. And they rang me up and said, should we move because of climate change? It's a small family business. And I said, well, I'm not going to tell you whether you should move or not, but I'll provide you all the information that I have. And I did that. And 6 months later, this small family business owner rang me back up and said, yeah, we did. We moved to the east of Scotland because we reckoned that was going to have a better climate in future for our business of a nursery growing orchard trees. And ever since then, I've thought, boy, there are these points in life when an opportunity arises. And we all have them, not just as businesses, but in life. You're changing your car, you're moving house, your boiler breaks down. Every one of those opportunities is the time for you to step in and say, yeah, I'm going to do something to save the planet.
Well, small family business, individuals. Mark, Zurich, huge company, global footprint. And it's the kind of business that is trying to sort of move forward in this area. Just explain to us how Zurich is trying to sort of improve its green credentials on the island.
So firstly, we're supported by Zurich Group, based in Switzerland. Mario Greco, our group CEO, is very passionate about the planet. He's in his third cycle now, a strategy cycle, and each of the cycles, sustainability has featured hugely in those strategies, which has the knock-on effect for us on the island, where we can seek and build on the group's demands to become net zero. So on the island, we've managed to secure funding to put a solar array in that's giving us almost 50% of our power in the first year, and we're just learning from that. There's so much more that we can do with battery storage, and then eventually with wind to take us off grid. We have a local opportunity to try and be off grid by 25, end of 25, if we can really motor. The group want us to be off grid by 30, the end of 2030, but we're trying to do it by the end of 25 if we can. Sure. But we need to work with the government, especially around wind, to see how we can really fulfil that.
Okay. I mean, you talk about if you can motor. I sincerely hope it's an electric vehicle.
For sure, absolutely.
That we're talking about, and we're going to talk about the sort of the effect that the government and the private sector can have in all of this in a few minutes. But I want to take some questions first. I'm just wondering if there's anyone with an initial question for our panel. There's a lady at the back there.
So you mentioned before that you try to encourage individuals to be more sustainable with their waste. How exactly do you do that?
So I gave up my career to spend full time focusing on Recycle Collect, and I spend most of my time actually out with schools, so visiting primary schools, high schools. Actually the biggest kind of impact comes from meeting up with other corporates, so going into different workplaces, holding like talks, and we are super kind of community based, so you'll see it as all the local community events. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not, Rome wasn't built in a day, so it's hard just me on my own going around to see every single school, every single corporate, but we've had huge success by doing that. And it's funny because everyone does think the same, everyone feels the same, and it's just educating, really. I was the person who 2 years ago had no idea about Isle of Man and the waste strategy, and took the time to look into it and even build like a social enterprise upon it. And now it's about going out and sharing that. And do you know what? Kids know so much. They know sometimes so much more than me. And I was just at St. John's School the other day, and I got a letter through in the post this morning just saying, like, this is what we'd learn, and this is how we want to see it in the Isle of Man. And it's just amazing. Kids are incredible. And I think that's definitely a big driver for me, is getting out and speaking to the children.
So do you encourage people like of school age to recycle and to reduce their waste?
Yeah, and do you know what, it's not even me encouraging it, it's that they already know. When I go in to say, you need reduce, reuse, recycle, they're like, yeah, and this is how I reduce at home, and this is how I reuse. And I think the biggest education piece actually doesn't come from the kids. It comes from us going into people of, working age who are in work, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't know I could do that, and this is how I reduce my waste. And it's a total change in mindset, and it will take time, but people are definitely receptive to it, although I'd love more people to want to talk more about rubbish with me. Thank you.
Okay, gentleman there with his hand up.
You mentioned something about Isle of Man ecology, like the basking sharks, and that I assume is applicable to all the biosphere around the island, that it gets altered through the change of climate. But how can we reverse what has already happened? Because we can try to slow it down, but how can we reverse what is already happening? Because it is already in the course of happening. We have probably lost some species, as you said. Butterflies are growing bigger, which is probably applicable to most worm-liking insects. How can we reverse the course of it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because clearly trying to slow down climate change is something that we all need to do, but there are other pressures on wildlife as well. So habitat loss, for example, pressures from invasive non-native species, and there are things that we can make a more direct, immediate effect on. So creating more habitat or saving more habitat, and we do that through our reserves, but we also do it through things like being the delivery partner for the government's agri-environment scheme. Our reserves are only less than 1% of the whole terrestrial area of the Isle of Man. But agricultural land accounts for 75%. So if we can work with those farmers on creating food in a more environmentally friendly, more sustainable way that supports wildlife, we're going to be creating more habitat for that wildlife to live in, more food for that wildlife to feed on, so that when the weather does change, not just getting warmer, but more erratic weather, more storms, there's more habitat there for them to survive in.
Okay, Professor Curran, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, as I said earlier, 1/3 of our man-made carbon emissions end up going into the terrestrial biosphere, soaked up by forests and plants and our own crops as well. But there's a growing worry that amount is reducing. And if you push some of the climate models to extreme, in fact, the biosphere can start releasing carbon dioxide itself back into the atmosphere. That's a big, big risk, and that's a risk we must not go anywhere near. So we've got to rebuild and strengthen and regenerate the biosphere, our ecosystems, all over the world, but certainly locally where and when we can. And one of the things I'm very supportive of, I don't know if you would be, is rewilding, because nature can do it itself. Give nature a chance. Keep the animals, predominantly sheep, deer in Scotland, out, and nature will recover very rapidly. And, that's quite a cheap way of doing it.
All right, okay. Ralph, I mean, we talked about the public, what they can do. I wonder if it's actually the private sector that is potentially the most important in all of this because of the resources that they can bring to all of this. Governments can frame policies, but implementation is probably more likely to come from the private sector. Are you getting enough engagement from businesses in relation to all of this? Are they seeing the point of what we're all trying to do here?
Yeah, on a global scale, the private sector have got the knowledge, the expertise, and the drive and motivation to actually get infrastructure in place. So that's what, on a global scale, and certainly that's what we want to do on the Isle of Man as well, get that knowledge and expertise and drive here. But from a local point of view, I think it's great some businesses are actually showing how they can actually do this, and we've just heard from Zurich. They're sort of leading the way, really. So as Clara said, it's a big issue, but we can actually chunk it down and actually make our decisions to actually do how we can help. And local businesses do want to do that. I do chair a group for the Chamber of Commerce, and we've got a group of people there who actually do want to do it. So we've created a model on how to actually calculate business CO2 output. And so once you actually start measuring things, you become aware of it, and you can then take those decisions to actually make a positive contribution. So the will is there. I would certainly like to say that government is now in a position where they do have the legislation. I do believe that there is some will there. I do believe that they actually want to do it, but it's just trying to get the public to actually make that move to actually give some almost reassurance to our political members that the public do want this.
But we've heard that. Everyone here wants to get involved. They want to recycle stuff, and they're worried about the natural habitats and so on. So, I mean, certainly, this is a cross-section of the population here on the island. I don't see a problem with the public pushing. Is there a blockage at the political level? Is that what we're talking about?
There is certainly, in my opinion, there's certainly a view that government wants to do most of it themselves, and I think it would be better if government actually stepped back sometimes and allowed the private sector to actually get in and actually use their knowledge and deliver their expertise and actually get things done.
Okay. Mark from Zurich, bottom line is, it's cheaper, isn't it? You're saving money.
It is.
Bottom line, it makes sense.
No, absolutely. The return on investment, you know, a solar array, 25 years, the panels will last. So the return on investment was 7 years, 7 to 8 years for us. So it does make sense to do that. Local suppliers as well, where we could, to keep that on the island. But there are small changes you can make all the time, as Cara's been saying. So even in the office ourselves, you know, recycling, looking at the light luxes in your office, putting little toilet blocks just inside the toilet to stop the amount of water you're using. Right. Every time you flush, we've seen a reduction in our water usage. Sorry, our electricity usage of up to 25% based on pre-pandemic levels, just by making small changes around the office with some investment, but not big investment. So, you know, I think businesses like Zurich can work with organisations like Rouse to help other businesses learn from the changes that we've made to try and encourage more of that. Because if every company can even save 10% of the electricity that they're consuming, that can make a massive difference across the island.
Yeah. Got a question from Margaret. Okay, this must have come in online. This question is from her. How do we know that all these wind farms are not damaging our climate, wildlife, birds, insects, and all living things in our oceans? Adrian, is that a possibility?
I see that viewpoint, but the footprint of wind turbine technologies is actually quite small. Whether it's on land or the seabed, the footprint is small. Yes, okay, on top of that footprint of a tower, there is a turbine spinning. But again, the airspace it's moving through is small. And so there may be a perception it's going to have an impact on local wildlife, but I think that impact would be very, very small. I think there are other factors in our environment that have an impact on various species. And I would think the benefits of having renewables, having less fossil fuels burning in our atmosphere, heating up our oceans, heating up our atmosphere, that's having a bigger impact on the biosphere, the biodiversity of any one area, whether that's in the air or the sea. So I think overall the benefits of a renewable wind turbine technology outweigh small disadvantages.
All right. Would you agree with that, Graham? Makepeace-Warne from the Manx Wildlife Trust?
Yes, I would. If you look at the potential damage, let's just take offshore wind as an example. Yeah, there can be issues from the seismic, driving the piles in to the seabed. We know that bird strikes can be an issue, but they're quite small numbers compared to other threats. Threats from feral cats, for example, in the case of terrestrial wind turbines, they can wipe out a lot more birds than bird strikes from wind turbines. But there's also positives. Going back to a marine wind farm, where you put those turbines, effectively becomes a marine protected area because they can no longer fish in that area. If it's a fairly plain sedimentary seabed, then putting those pilings in will actually give a place for wildlife to grow and become a reef. So there's positives and negatives, obviously. But as I said before, in the future, climate change is going to be the biggest threat to wildlife. So unless we come up with ways to reduce our energy usage and to create energy sustainably, then everything else is a drop in the ocean.
Sure, Professor.
Yeah, there's an interesting and quite widely quoted figure that 90% of biodiversity loss is due to the extraction and subsequent processing of natural resources from the planet. So the more we can drive down the extraction of coal, oil, gas, and all the metals and so on that we use, developing a more sustainable economy, then we'll save that 90% of biodiversity that is being trashed at the moment.
Greg Easton, I think, is in the audience. Greg, where are you? Hello there. You've got a question about the Trust and Trustees Act.
Thank you, Clive. So yeah, looking at, I suppose, policy legislation on the Isle of Man, it's great we've got the Climate Change Act. We had the new Trust and Trustees Act this year. And at one stage, there were going to be included within that provisions for sustainability, and they were dropped at the last minute. So my question really to the panel is, did we miss an opportunity there? Particularly when you look at things around sort of fiduciary duty and the responsibility that businesses have here. So we're an island of financial services. We have a lot of people with power and influence over how money gets invested. If we'd have brought in those provisions in the Trust and Trustees Act, we'd have had more ability to sort of go back to the biosphere points there, that we actually we become more sustainable as a whole. And I feel like we've missed that opportunity for now. And actually the hard to abate bits for us at an island are the assets under our influence and control. And until we address that, then we can do everything around the edges, which is brilliant. But actually, if we continue to invest in fossil fuels and companies that fund fossil fuels, then we're not really having the impact that we could do as an island.
Quite a few people nodding along in the audience here. Ralph Peake, missed an opportunity?
Yeah, missed opportunity, but we've missed plenty of opportunities, to be honest. And
that's why we're all here.
Just one of them. I think that's an opportunity, to be honest, for financial services to actually lead, to actually say that they're only going to do investments in renewable energy. They're not going to invest in fossil fuels. So whether it's in part of the Act or not, you've still got the opportunity to announce that, to actually attract customers. That's what I think we should do. It'd be great to have a financial sector here on the Isle of Man that actually is committed to sustainability, not only for their office, but for their portfolio, and attract new customers. The Isle of Man could then be the centre of financial services that is sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, Mark, are there other companies looking at what you're doing at Zurich?
In what we've absolutely, Manx Telecom just put a similar size solar array on their building. Right. We're working with other companies up on the business park who we're talking about car sharing, carpooling opportunities as well, to try and see if we can reduce the traffic and the emissions coming to work. People are talking to us about the fact that we've got electric car charging spaces. Would we be willing to offer those out to other users on the business park? So there are lots going on, lots of chat up on our business park. Again, through conversations with Ralph and David, we are happy to facilitate and get involved in lots of conversations on this. So I think the momentum is getting there. I think companies are just trying to work out what it is they can achieve, especially if you rent a quarter of a floor in a building in the middle of Douglas. What is it that a company like that can do to make a difference? Yeah. Haven't got the opportunities that Zurich has, having its own building, etc. So there was a lot more that we can do to help companies to drive, those type of activities.
Yeah. I mean, Professor Curran, a lost opportunity, Trust and Trustees Act.
A lost opportunity?
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know anything about the detail of that particular piece of legislation, but it strikes me when you declare an emergency, a climate emergency, then it's incumbent on you to start doing things differently. And that, to me, means every opportunity should be grasped urgently to start doing things differently in every way, because what we've been doing up to now is what's got us in this mess.
Okay, let's hit some more questions from the audience. I'll come to you in a second. There's a gentleman here at the front. Get a microphone to him.
I think my question comes in two parts, really. Part number one is that we've heard this debate numerous times, and the only thing we seem to be able to do is form committees. We seem pretty good at doing that. So what's stopping the action going forward? And the other point I think I'd challenge, when you say that everybody's on board with the ideals, the fastest growing fashion brand on the Isle of Man is flown directly in from China in non-recyclable plastic bags. So we don't seem to have won a lot of the young people's minds that we think we've got. And I mean, that brand in America has got 44 million customers, and each individual parcel is parcelled in China and flown directly. So I think the two challenges are, one, you know, we've had loads of these, you know, what we've managed to do is create a committee, but not a lot else. And secondly, is have we really got everybody's mind, because it seems to have stalled?
Yeah, Ralph Peake, I mean, that goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. There's a logjam somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult enough to try and get people to measure and change their scope 1, let alone scope 2 and 3, which was part of the question, things coming in from China. We've exported a lot of our manufacturing to reduce our CO2 output in the UK. China has increased their CO2 output because they're doing all the manufacturing for the rest of the world. So that's a mindset change. We're trying to get people to want to change their buying habits, perhaps look at circular economy. I know James had a business a number of years ago that focused on that sort of recyclable, renewable economy. It's a mindset change. The debate has to happen. You're right about committees. Action does need to happen, but what we wanted to do here is to highlight what is happening, and Zurich are doing something. They're showing some real leadership here to businesses on the Isle of Man, and it'd be great for more people to follow them.
Clara, I mean, your business is across the island. Are you meeting any resistance? Are you, when you turn up and you're trying to get, you know, the recycled wellies or whatever it is, you know, you see a big, thick rubbish bag next to it full of stuff that could be recycled but isn't being recycled. Are you getting the kind of commitment from the people out there?
We don't receive resistance because people choose to come to us. So actually our following is people who are already on board. The sad thing is that there's actually a large proportion of our population who aren't on board, and it's so sad with your likes of, I know, the global fashion brand that is growing, because, you know, it all comes down to people are penny pinching, and, you know, the cost of living crisis makes it difficult for everyone, and people think, well, if I buy the cheaper clothes and it saves me money. But actually I think it's more, you know, and there's some amazing ladies I can see in the crowd tonight who actually have businesses now who are going out and help and educate people that actually living more sustainably can be what can save you money. And taking that into a personal level, you know, you think that buying the cheap fashion brand stuff that's coming in all the time is saving you money, but actually it's not, and there is a way around that. You know, all we come across really is people who are really on board with what we're doing, and I've never came across someone, and this could be the circles that I'm kind of mixing in, that say, no, I don't want to do that, or there is some resistance, because actually I see people making huge progressive steps. It's just about helping people understand, and I did actually notice the other day that the Net Zero team had actually put out a publication on social media helping people to understand that. But I do think it's all about helping to influence. You know, you see now social media is huge. If you start to influence people and help people understand, actually being sustainable is quite cool. I've been to conferences before where people have said, oh, but living sustainably is so expensive. It's like, no, it's not. You know, it's so much better. It can be cool. It can save you money. And I think we will get there eventually, but we need those leaders, especially on the Isle of Man. It breaks my heart when I see those, you know, people ordering so much of that stuff that comes through. But from my business and from Recycle Collect, those people aren't doing it. We just want more people to be like us rather than like them.
Sure. Mark, you wanted to come in on an earlier point.
I think it comes about from a mandate, doesn't it? You know, Zurich set a mandate, and it doesn't matter whether our group CEO changes, the mandate is embedded from the board down. So, right. And I don't know, sometimes, you know, MHKs get a 5-year mandate to do something. Is what can I do in 5 years? You know. So I think there is something embedded in that short-termism within having a 5-year mandate to make a difference. I think you have to have that long-term commitment, that long-term mandate to really want to do it. And I think that's probably where we're missing a little bit, I think, with that. You know, 2050 is long-term, but it's a long, long way away, and I think it's maybe too far away.
Yeah. But Professor Curran, wouldn't you agree that this rises above a party political issue? This rises above trying to get votes for the next election and to get in, you know, in 4 years' time or whatever. This is about, there shouldn't be any debate about this.
No, you're right. This is existential. So where does party politics fit into that? It simply doesn't. But picking up on the point made in the audience about consumerism and that it's dominated by kind of throwaway products. Yes, we need to develop the circular economy to get away from that linear extraction, use, dump. The planet cannot afford that, and we certainly can't as people who live on the planet. But you know, there's three, to me, really lovely pieces of legislation coming through Europe at the moment. So you can legislate for this kind of issue. One, I won't get the names quite right, but there's a directive of due diligence, which means every product, either manufactured or imported into Europe, you have to ensure that the supply chain, the value-added chain, complies with European standards of environmental protection or other agreed international standards. Boy, that's powerful. There's a right to repair directive. So any product you buy, you have a right to get it repaired, or it should be designed, and this is a classic central plank of a circular economy, it should be made in such a way that you can repair it yourself or get it upgraded or whatever. You don't throw it away. And the third piece of legislation going through is about green claims, to stop greenwashing, the sort of nonsense we get about environmental products. So there's three pieces of legislation, you know, which begin to knock that kind of consumerism on the head. Europe can do it, others can do it.
Right. Graham? You want to come in there?
I'd agree with Professor Curran. I think legislation is the key here. I think the gentleman in the audience made a really good point, and as the person in charge of engagement at Manx Wildlife Trust, as much as I know we do a really good job, we're never going to convince everyone that we need to do more for nature, that we need to fix the climate crisis. So the only way we're going to do that is through the money. And if we charge properly for nature's capital, so the value that's taken out of nature to produce a product, or the damage that's done to nature to create the energy to create that product and ship it here from is it China, I think you said, you know, then that's going to price it out of the market. So those people that are buying it, which I'm sure they're doing it just because of the value of it, will go and you know, shop more sustainably because that's the cheapest thing to do. I'm obviously not, you know, into my fashion, but the most stylish people I know buy their clothes from second-hand shops, from charity shops.
Indeed. All right, okay. There was a lady who had her hand up a little bit earlier.
So just going back to the very start of the conference, you said that there was damage to the island's biosphere, but how extensive is it compared to like the rest of the world's biosphere? And what do you think is like the most, like the worst problem we're facing right now? And what's the most damaging to our environment for the island?
I think some of the weather impacts already are hitting the biodiversity, and they're putting a stress on the ecosystems of the Isle of Man and other places. And that's because this warmer, moister atmosphere that we're living in is producing heavy rainfall events more frequently. In my career of 40 years, events of heavy rainfall that were scouring our rivers occasionally, maybe once every 20 years, it's a cleansing process, but you only want it to happen about once every 20 years. Those sort of events are happening closer to once every 5 years now. And that has an impact in scouring out the rivers and the wildlife that lives in and around the rivers. So there's one impact. But also that silt, there's some good silt and there's some bad silt that's washed out from the island's rivers into the coastal waters. There's a delicate balance, of course, in all oceans and waters in terms of acidity, and the acidity is generally rising very, very slowly because of the CO2 being absorbed by the oceans, as well as some of the heat. So all those factors are putting a stress on those ecosystems. The biodiversity changes, and we're seeing different species coming in, as Graham said, but equally we're seeing some not able to survive because nature can adapt, but it has to have time to adapt, and the changes we're seeing in the climate, in the weather patterns, are happening too quickly. We're not buying enough time for this planet to adjust.
Yuboslav Shinovsky. I think he's in the audience. You asked a question before, sir. But I'm going to take this other one because I think it's quite interesting. It's something to do with large international companies in fossil fuels.
Yes, we've got companies on that one, like the main heating way on that one is through gas. We also got the main cooking way through that one is through gas. We get the only way to get to that one is using some sort of fossil fuel. And we get so many gas stations, we get all of those things, which the island currently depends on. And they're international companies that are earning quite a bit of share of their money, but probably they're over the world, so they're earning most of it outside. We're a small country after all. But still, how are we going to tackle those people which have had the grip on that one for probably before any of us in this room were born, and probably before our parents were born? They had a grip on that one, and they probably are not looking to relinquish it anytime soon.
The big companies, international companies that control fossil fuel and natural gas businesses on the island. How do you tackle them?
They're not going to let go easy, are they? They're really not. So that's the point. So the great thing is that renewable energy can now be produced cheaper than with fossil fuels. And so that's something the Isle of Man needs to embrace. Other countries are doing it, other islands are doing it. The Isle of Man isn't yet, but I've got confidence in the government that they will now realise that we've passed the time of actually talk. We now must move forward. So yes, the big fossil companies won't like it, but I hope the public will get behind it and realise that if we can reduce the public sphere in the future, they can then get on board with this, do what they can themselves, but then also contact their MHKs to say that they want the future to be sustainable and renewable energy.
Okay. This is a question from Helena, who is tuning in online. How will companies based on the island take responsibility for the huge emissions in their supply chains, from data centres to financial investments in fossil fuels? Mark?
Yeah, part of the work that Zurich's doing is we brought a new third-party governance framework in, so everyone that we're doing business with has to stand to muster. I think, James, you mentioned this legislation coming in through Europe. Well, what Zurich's done through its business is saying, if you want to do business with us, you have to stand up to muster. So what's your supply chain? Where do you staff your employees? How do you treat your employees? So there's a lot that we're doing as an industry to make sure that our supply chain is going to be sustainable in the future. But it's going to take us some time as well, because there isn't huge numbers of companies that we want to deal with that are as sustainable as we are. But by introducing this framework, we start to talk to our suppliers about what steps they need to take. How can we help them take those steps in order to remain a supplier of Zurich?
And if those suppliers do not conform to some kind of charter or rules-based document or whatever, then it's going to be made clear to them that they're going to be dropped.
Elsewhere. Yeah, we will have to look elsewhere.
Right. I mean, it's important that, isn't it, the supply chain, because the problem is that those supply chains can be so long that some companies might not even know necessarily what's at the very beginning or way down the track in terms of, one supplier using another supplier that they actually don't know about, potentially.
Very much. And that happens not just in the supply chain, but also where your data's housed and who's got access to your data. So it takes a lot of rigour through the process to try and make sure that you can understand exactly who you're doing business with, and where that supply chain comes from, or where your data's going. It's becoming super important to certainly to Zurich, but also to our customers as well, to really understand, who Zurich is and who's supplying us.
Yeah. So Clara, I mean, are you on top of? You obviously know where your clothes and whatever, the stuff that's being recycled, you know where that's coming from.
Yeah.
Are you in control of where it goes?
I think like what we've kind of seen in terms of like our clothing and stuff, like we're only small, so I get to pick exactly what we're getting and I will research it to the nth degree. But in terms of what this lady speaking about, you know, there are businesses that are bigger than that who need to consider quite a lot more. And really, I'm not buying anything, you know, I'm picking things up. But there is a huge thing to say as employees, like stand up and speak up about it. Do you know, every business that I've been into has started to consider things about where they're buying things from. But I think they've got to know how important it is to you as an employee and, you know, even choosing where you're going to work. And I think if we're speaking up as employees about what we want to see, businesses will need to start moving in that direction. And I think, you know, it's great for me saying that, yes, that's what I do and what other small local businesses do, which I see plenty of. But it's the bigger ones that, you know, they maybe need a bit more encouragement, and also they're going to need a bit more time to make the transition as well. So definitely speak up about it if you feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah, and it's not just, of course, employees, it's shareholders.
Yeah.
Companies as well who will be feeling that this is the way forward, and they can put pressure on Professor Curran.
Yeah, I mean, perfection shouldn't be the enemy of the good. We know that. And Ralph mentioned that at one point, my wife and I both gave up our careers to open a kind of sustainability shop right in Glasgow city centre with a 100% organic cafe and so on. And every single item that we stocked, and the shorthand to try and describe it to people was we called it the John Lewis of the environment, because we did virtually carry stock the entirety that John Lewis does, you know, but we were tiny. But only one. We would choose the best.
Right.
And we, like you, put a lot of research into stocking the one tumble dryer. Now, a lot of environmentalists would think tumble dryers, no, anathema. But if you have a baby in a tenement in Glasgow in the winter when it's pouring with rain, you need a tumble dryer, okay? So we sourced the best, which happened to come from Yorkshire and was incredibly energy efficient. I remember that one particularly well. So, you know, you can do it. If you want to do it as a business, you can do it. You do your best. You may not get it perfectly right. We had one customer who came in and said, I really object to that product. We took it very seriously and looked into it. He was right.
What was the appliance?
It was claiming to be palm oil wax, round table palm oil. Right. Palm oil is, yeah, it's under suspicion now, but this was in 2007. But it was round table palm oil, so it was meant to be sustainable, but it wasn't, it was paraffin.
Ah.
Yeah, green claims, yes.
Well, you've got to be careful of people actually, you know, telling the odd fib here and there about the green credentials of the product or the business or whatever it is that they're actually dealing with.
Yeah, but you can do your best.
But you can do your best, absolutely. Let's get another question from the audience. There is a lady just here.
Hi, I'm kind of particularly interested in hearing maybe from the less ecologically minded members of the panel, but I'm interested to hear, we've spoken in bits this evening, but I feel like there's a common thread, and I'm really interested to hear about how you think our relationship needs to change with the rest of the natural world to create the future that we all kind of seem to want as a collective.
Graham.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if when she said the less ecologically minded, that was not me. Sorry, Ro. But I mentioned before nature's capital. I think, again, it comes back to the money, and it's tying the value of a product or a choice with the material that it takes from the environment or the damage it does to the environment. I think if we do that, we don't need to change mindsets if we do that, because everybody is already quite frugal in the way that they shop, in the way that they make the decisions. If we can tie the value of a product to its actual, the value it takes from nature, then people will automatically make the right decision. That's the key for me.
Is that in labelling then? Might that be a good idea?
I think, you know, we're trying to do it with
It took 3 trees to, you know, make this loo roll or something.
Yeah, I don't think the evidence is there. We're trying to do it with salt and sugar, and it's not really working, is it? I think it's purely price point. That seems to be what drives people the most. If something costs more because they've paid for the amount of material they've removed from the environment, or they've paid for the damage they've done to the environment, or they've paid for the recycling of the materials that product is packaged in, then people will automatically be buying more sustainable products because they'll be cheaper.
And at the moment, are they cheaper?
Well, I don't know.
Depends on the product.
Yeah, I don't know whether they exist. Generally, the more sustainable products, which I try and choose, are more expensive for that reason.
And that's the problem, isn't it? We're in a cost of living crisis, Ralph.
We are, but I think to try and be as broad as you can be, protecting the wildlife, that must be reducing our fossil fuel use. It must be, because that is pumping poisons into the atmosphere, reducing the air quality, and as we've heard before, it's going to affect all wildlife. So in a few years' time, we're going to be really affecting wildlife. That can't be good news, and we've got to make a stop. Now is the time to do that.
Okay, let's get another question. I think we're going to, lady over there. Hi there.
Hey, thank you. Thanks very much for your comments this evening. I'm just interested, Mr. Cowin described what had already happened with climate change, but some of the latest research is suggesting that it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to keep the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. And I've heard one survey said it was going to be a hellish future in the climate world. So what potentially could we be seeing when there's resentment about putting seawalls at Douglas and Laxey for the potential rise of 7 metres in sea levels? So I just wondered, between Professor and Mr. Cowin, what will we be seeing as the result of climate change on the island potentially by 2050?
Well, people need to believe there will be change for a start. All greenhouse gas emission climate projection models cause a change. The greater the increment in climate change above 1.5 Celsius, which is a figure that has been derived at by many scientists internationally, looks like it's not going to be achieved. We're just ahead of COP28 as we speak, and the annual assessment report, the 6th one, going to the IPCC, say it's unlikely we will achieve and hold to that 1.5. It is more likely we're going to be knocking towards the 2 Celsius. So an impact on that will be, to visualise it, things will happen even quicker than they have done already. A little lump of rock in the middle of the Irish Sea called the Isle of Man, what does that look like? Well, that looks like in the next 15 years, by 2050 for certain, we'll see heavy rainfall events more likely, more severe, more often. And you mentioned the tidal and coastal concerns, tidal and coastal defences. We will need them. You'll have to consider protecting people and properties because of sea level rise and increased storminess in our atmosphere, driving storm surges into the British Isles, up the Irish Sea. We'll have coastal overtopping. Our coastal walls will need to be stronger and higher. And our harbours will have to also have some defences because sea level itself could rise, according to most models, by between 20 and 50 centimetres by the middle of this century. So it's not something that's over the horizon. It's not the end of the century. It's the middle of this century. We have to be doing something about that. And at the same time, colleagues at COP28 need to get their act together and agree on cutting down, extracting more fossil fuels from around the planet.
I think that is probably a very good point at which to stop. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in part one of our conversation here, the Isle of Man Sustainability Debate. Thanks to our panel. Round of applause. And many thanks to you for all your questions. It has been a very, very lively conversation. Part two of our debate continues in a moment. Thank you.